Good afternoon. Welcome back to the B&H Event Space, another edition of Westcott Wednesday. We are back with you. Illuminate with Impact, dramatic lighting for beginners. I'd like to welcome the man himself, Mr. JC Carey. JC, what's up, man?
How you been? It's been a bit.
It's
I
been a
uh,
while.
yeah, you weren't at WPPI. You're not coming out anymore. I don't see you. Like so,
They got me locked up in a closet, and that's it. And they don't let me out.
well, it's a good looking closet. It's very well lit. You got a nice mic. You look good.
The professional source, baby.
That makes sense. How was your break?
JC,
Was it good?
it was good. It was good. How's
Good.
everything been with you? You've been all over the place.
Yeah, and May's gonna be even more insane, but it's good. I mean, it's better busy than not, right?
That's right. And you had that successful in-person event that we did recently with you guys, and
With Carey, it was great. It was a good
hopefully more to
time.
come.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, JC, I'll let you get to it and do your thing. I'll remind everybody, if you do have any questions for JC, drop them into the chat on YouTube, and I will see you in a bit for the Q&A.
Great. I'm gonna hit share now and this and share. And we're gonna now hit okay, play. All right. So everybody, thanks for coming out here. I'm JC from JC Photo Media, and welcome to this magical, mysterious, sometimes seemingly overcomplicated world of lighting. Don't worry. Um, I'm here to make it less mysterious. Some of you that have seen me in the past may be familiar, because I teach from Fear to Flash, and this will seem pretty familiar to you, but I'm going to really focus on drama and how to get that because it's my experience that a lot of people ask for that. So let's make this happen and move ahead. First thing I want to do is just thank Westcott for putting me on here and for making all the gear that I use. Obviously, I worked there, but I used Westcott gear long before I worked there, which is always a fun thing to be able to say that you're using gear that you actually believe in. Here is my information. I definitely invite you to check me out and hit me up if you have any questions that we don't cover today. There's my email, there's my Instagram. I definitely respond to every comment and every question, and I hope that there's some information there that inspires you today. So, one of the things that people always say is like, how did you get into photography or how did you get into lighting? And the thing is that from the time that I picked up a camera, I knew I was in trouble. I knew this was going to be a thing that I was always going to do. And whether it was sports or concerts, whether I was chasing around birds or trying to dodge stage divers, I've always loved having a camera in my hand. I definitely kind of live by this idea that if I don't have my camera, then I'm just standing around staring. And there probably could be some therapy involved there to be like, hey, how come you only feel like you're really experiencing the world when you have a camera in your hand? But it is how I create memories. I'm not a person who buys souvenirs. I'm a person who takes pictures. But at the end of the day, whether I'm shooting abandoned buildings or I'm shooting sports or I'm, any of that, for me, photography is this really great blend of art and science. And I've been blessed to be able to shoot some amazing, amazing things where I was definitely taking pictures. And for me, as somebody who wants to feel as though I'm somewhat artistic, one of the best ways to separate yourself is to learn to light. Lighting is really that way to separate yourself from the people who just take photos and make yourself into somebody who makes photos. And I'm not downing anybody who doesn't want to do light, but I'm just saying if you want to separate yourself, there's really a soft box for that truth that you need to learn to light. So does it seem complex to some people? Yeah, that's why my class is called From Fear to Flash, my main class that I do, because I've definitely always heard people say that they were scared. And I started out that same way. I was terrified. But I think that I've come up with a way that I think is pretty easy. And, there's lots of good ways, but this is my way. So I'm going to talk about me for 1 second. I'm a dad, I'm a photographer, and then I'm a sales guy in that order. Um, I love all three of those things, but being a dad is the best. And that's why this class starts with a picture of me and Z. So let's do this. one of the things that I see people get really caught up in is this idea that they need to buy a ton of gear and be really, really technical and learn all the jargon. And I don't think that's true. I think that, 3 boxes, 4 boxes, 5 different lights, I can make some pictures that are really amazing. But quite honestly, if I can get one light and move it around and learn to get some kind of consistency, I can make some really great pictures. And what I love more than anything is that moment when I'm teaching, especially a live class, where somebody goes through their settings, we go through some process, they look down and they get that feeling like you first show fire to a fish, right? And it's, why do I say that? Because like fire to a fish is something that's totally unnecessary, but it's compelling. The fish's eyes get wide, it's staring at it. If we can add light, it's like taking the training wheels off of looking awesome. It's one light, one shadow, create instant mood, stylish, mysterious. We can hide a lot of mistakes by doing that, but we can just tell everybody where to go. It's way more fun than fumbling with a bunch of lights, is to have to break out one, maybe two, and just create something that says, look at me. Now, when I talk to certain people, they say, I'm an available light shooter. And I will almost always question, I know sometimes it can probably come across snarky, but I'll say, well, was the flash not available to you? Because if I'm going to go from this, which is a fine exposed image, I guess, but I can come to here by adding one light, that's my choice. But the question really becomes, what is the missing link? How do I go from that first picture to this picture? And I think too many people overcomplicate this. Like, there's really no reason for somebody who's already pretty comfortable with their camera settings to not be able to light. So let's start with the why should we add light? There's one reason and one reason only: to be creative. If the ambient light doesn't give you the picture that you like, add light. If the ambient light isn't good when you go out to shoot, for me, I don't want to wait all day for great light. I want to be able to move forward, shoot, create, and like I said earlier, make photos. I don't want to have a picture where I'm stuck with certain settings because that's what fits what the camera's telling me to do. I want to be able to create, pre-visualize, and make photos. So before we get into all of that, I just want to real quick, this is a commercial break, so to speak, but this is the stuff that I carry. And this is stuff that I carry every day with me. It's either in my car, which I'm not going to tell you where it is, or there's always at least a speed light or an FJ200 in my camera bag, because much like I said, if I'm not carrying my camera, I'm just standing around staring at people. If I'm not carrying a light, I know that I'm missing out on some potential images that I'd love to make. So whether it is the FJ82 or the FJ80 SE, which gives you all the great stuff about Westcott at an affordable price, or it's a 200, the 402, or the big light on the block these days, the FJ800, I have these with me because they open up a realm of creative possibilities for me. Now, why pick Westcott over competing brands? We've got customer service that answers the phone. I know that that's something that sounds like it's trite or like it's not really even possible these days, but give it a shot. Call. Reliability, I don't really need to talk about misfires because I don't get them. Shot to shot, my lights are the same color temperature, and that's really all that I can ask for out of my lights. It's kind of like, the Westcott gear got sent to therapy and got rid of all its issues. It might not be the most expensive gear. It might not be the gear that is the fanciest, but it works every time. And I love that. As a photographer, that is what I want. And that's the end of the commercial break. Let's move forward. Let's jump into process. So why do I talk about process so much? And why am I going to probably end up repeating myself a bunch of times during this class? Because when somebody asks me, and you'll see settings throughout this because people demand it. People demand to know what it is. And when they say, hey, what were your settings on that? I pause, I take a look at them. I kind of try to feel the vibe. Are they interested in learning? Or do they just want a shortcut that's going to take them over a cliff at some point where they get to that and they go, wait, he said the 2.8 at 4,000 at 100 ISO with the light at this distance is going to make this great picture. And it doesn't. And of course it's not going to. You can follow lighting setups from YouTube. You can, but the minute you get into a room with a low ceiling, a red wall, a light stand head together with duct tape that's fallen over and not staying at the angle that you wanted to, that recipe is about as useless as an electric lamp in a blackout. You really have to be able to learn to light anywhere, anytime, anything. And the only way to really do that is to get process over recipe. Recipes are really great, but you have to start with a good, solid foundation of ingredients in order to make anything that's good. And in this case, the process is the ingredients. Now, as a photographer, problem solving is going to be like one of your number one things. And being able to figure out on the fly how to make all of these things work is going to be something that's going to separate you quickly. People are going to see you, and if you can do it fast, even if it's not the best, people are going to go, wow, that was impressive. He just made something good out of nothing. As the great philosopher Mike Tyson once said, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. You might walk into a shoot with a perfect light setup, a great plan, a great concept, and then the weather changes. The wind turns one of your lights into a sledgehammer, and now you've only got one. Your subject shows up in a completely different outfit. You're like, oh my God. Well, this is where the magic happens. If you can have a solid process, a solid way of thinking to fall back upon, you can do anything that I can do. I promise that to you. It's all about adapting, problem solving. The punch is going to come. You got to learn how to punch back. Now, I fall back to this all the time. This piece of advice is that I've given myself and that I've learned through years of failure. If there's one thing that you take out of this whole class, it's this. And I hope that when you're going to shoot and you order some, FJ400s from D&H today, and you go out to try them out and you're going, what do I do? And like you start by turning on your light and you are frustrated because it doesn't look the way that this looks. And then you go, wait, I saw this guy on YouTube one time, and he said every lit image is 2 separate exposures. Now, somebody had told me that, it was really like the biggest light bulb moment for me was realizing that I've got this exposure that I took here, f4, 6400. The sky looks perfect. The building doesn't matter to me so much. But I was really out there, and I needed to get that sky. And if I take this picture of her without my lights, I lose that sky because I can either expose for her or I can expose for the sky. But in this case, I get to do both because I can add light to the picture. And if you always fall back to that every lit picture is 2 separate exposures, you're halfway there. I assume that if you're here and you're spending your time looking for this information, or that you've decided that you're going to cut out 45 minutes, an hour out of your day to come listen to me, you already know how to use your aperture and your shutter speed, I hope, right? So let's go from there. Let's build on a process that's centered around that rather than starting off by talking about lights and modifiers. Let's start with what we do all the time as photographers. Now, I mentioned failing forward. Failing forward is something that I don't think can be embraced enough. Like there's just not enough failing forward that I can talk to you about because it's really been a guiding principle. For me, that failing forward has led to the point where I'm looking at a scene and I'm looking at it and I'm licking my finger and putting it in the air and I'm going, that's going to be f4 at 800th. That's going to be, f11 at 200th, and being pretty right. Now, most of you, I'd venture a guess that 70% of you at this point are using mirrorless cameras, and you're able to get some sort of a what you see is what you get out of that camera. And that's great, but it is never going to show you what a strobe looks like once it enters the chat, so to speak. So you're going to have to learn in your mind what it's going to look like once you add some lights. How is that going to work? How are you going to be able to incorporate those lights? And you're eventually going to go, how does it look when I put my Octa M or my deep focus reflector, all that? But if you can learn to look around and make guesses, and what I did, is I made it a game with myself. I would go out, I'd look, I'd take some guesses about not what the exposure is, because I very often, because I'm trying to make this, I'm doing this class about dramatic lighting, and my style tends to be pretty dramatic, so it kind of works out. Is I'm thinking about how I can get it to look when it's underexposed, when the colors are rich, when I've made a decision about whether I want a lot of depth of field or a little bit of depth of field. These are all things that I'm thinking about, and most photographers already are thinking about them, even if they haven't incorporated that thought process as an active thought process into their head. So, visualization, it's daydreaming with a purpose, walking around thinking about how would this look awesome? How would this be the picture that I want? Now, a lot of times things are going to fall apart. Things are going to go sideways. But if you have that solid process, when you suddenly don't have 20 feet and you've only got 5 feet of space, when you had space to do 6 lights and now you've got space for 1 light, you need to be able to step back, go, all right, what is my process and how do I make this work? Keep it simple. Now, one of the things that I also love about photography is the fact that today I wholeheartedly believe there's never been a better time to be a photographer as somebody that wants to make great photos without spending a lot of time learning and failing as much as we had to when I was younger. But that's because we've got great communities. We've got places like this that are sharing all kinds of free, beautiful content. We've got, groups and photo walks, and it is easier than ever to get good quickly. But it is important. And I'm just going to throw in a plug that if you're using Westcott gear, you got questions about Westcott gear, or you just want to come to a group that's non-snarky, come over to the Facebook group, to the Westcott lighting community, join up and see what we've got going on there. All right. Now, when I'm first going to shoot, the first thing that I start going is, why am I adding light? And like I said before, it's because I want to be creative. It's because I want to have total control over everything. So one of the first things I wrap my head around is that I'm going to put the camera in manual. And I'm going to do that because manual mode is like you're driving a race car and you've got stick shift and you can feel the road underneath you. And you're not just trying to be in the race and survive the race. You're trying to get to the end of this with precision. You're trying to have control over everything. You want to be able to say, this is where I want the shadows. This is what I want lit. This is what I want in focus. And the only way to really make that happen is by putting the camera in manual. So that's one thing to think about. Now let's do it. Let's go to process. I've had a lot of really wise people in my life over the last 20 years of trying to do this and get better at it. And, I like to think that I haven't directly stolen anything from anybody, but I think that one of the things that you do probably is you probably hear things and you incorporate them. So if some of this sounds familiar, it's probably going to be because I think there is usually a right way to do things. And, if you run into somebody who's wise sitting in the desert, listen to them, but ask, come to process. I do a process that stays in a certain order all the time. And when I start to fail, it almost always involves me getting out of this process. I think that it's kind of like slot cars when you're a kid. If you remember slot cars, you could go as fast as you wanted and you would pretty much stay. But if you started messing around and, adding banks and doing, getting out of your process and going, I'm going to go backwards, I'm going to put a bigger, you could fall off and fly off the rails. And all of a sudden you're going to be trying to fit the person or fit the decision and you're going to work backwards. And that's not good. This is, for me, lighting is about control. Consistency is the key to control. Control is the key to being creative. Now, the first two things that I think about are often ignored, which are ISO and focal length. Now, ISO for me is going to be probably 95% in my base ISO, whatever that is, whether that's 100, 64, 200, depends on your camera. I'm going to trust that you know that, but I want the best image quality possible. There are reasons that I would change it. I needed more battery life. I needed to recycle faster. I needed a more manageable hand-holding shutter speed. These are strategic decisions. I don't change ISO all willy-nilly because it's a universal change that's going to force me to change other things. So if I look at my picture and it seems underexposed, I'm not going to ISO because that's going to change the effect of my other camera settings. It's always the first one I'm going to choose, and unless I have to change it for a strategic reason, I'm not. Now, the second one for me is focal length, and that sometimes gets made for me because I've made a decision walking out the door that I'm going to pick up my 35-1.4 or I'm going to carry my 24-70 because it's practical and fits in my bag. And of course, then I'm going to use that. It's not necessarily a creative decision, but I am thinking about that because each one of those focal lengths is going to have a strong influence upon the first truly creative decision that I make, which is depth of field. Now, I didn't say aperture, even though aperture is how we control our depth of field, but I'm not thinking of it as aperture. I'm thinking of it as depth of field. There's only two really strong ways that we have to make sure that people that are looking at our pictures later know what we want them to look at, what's in focus and what's lit. If I change that up, that's fine if I'm doing it for a reason. If I was taking this photo and the background was distracting to me, so I decided to shoot really wide open, get rid of that, that was a creative choice. If now I have 4 or 5 people around him and now they're equally important, well, then I'm going to stop down. That's a creative choice. But I am not going to ever change it, pick an aperture to change the power of my flash, even though it will. If I change aperture mid-shot, it will increase or decrease the power of my flash, but it's also going to change my depth of field. If I'm going to change the power of my flash, I'm going to do it with my FGX 3M or my S, if I'm using a Sony. I'm not going to do it to change the power of the flash. I can almost see the logic in having done that pre-triggers that were able to control the power of the flashes, because it could be a little bit of a hassle to walk to the flash, change the power, come back, walk to the flash, change it, come back. But nowadays, it's as simple as just going to the trigger, changing the power, and moving on. So there's no reason for me to change my aperture once I start shooting unless I want to change my depth of field. Sometimes the depth of field is something that I want tons of. I'm going to, here I am, I'm at 16 millimeters, already a lot of depth of field, right? F10, everything's in focus. 400th of a second controls some of that. Sometimes the background is distracting. Sometimes there's things in the background that we don't find important. In this picture, where the background is not as important as the subject. Picking an aperture is going to give us that depth of field. And like I said earlier, I'm going to combine that with focal length. Focal length is something I definitely am thinking. This is 105 at 1.8. I've got a really shallow depth of field. When I look at this picture in hindsight, I kind of wish that I would have stopped down to 2.5 or something like that, because then the flowers would be tack sharp, but it works. She's tack sharp. That's what matters to me. Now, again, I can only say this a couple times. I don't want to repeat it over and over. Wide lenses at small apertures still have a lot of depth of field. Whereas, sometimes you're going to have a middle range lens. It doesn't even have to be that long, but at that same depth of field, at that same aperture choice, much less depth of field. So take that into account. I definitely have been guilty at various times in my life of shooting at really fast apertures because I had a lens with a really fast aperture. And then looking back at the pictures later on with a more critical eye than what I was looking at it on the back of the screen, and realizing that I've got a nose that's in focus or an eyelash that's in focus and an eye that's out. Or maybe I was shooting and my subject had great earrings, but I got their eyes in focus, but the earrings are totally out of focus because I made a decision to shoot really fast because it seemed really cool. Creative choices. Why are we adding lights? To be creative. So we want all that control. Now, we've come to a decision. We've decided how much depth of field we want. Now we got to control the background. We have to control all of the light in the image that we're not adding. Because remember, every lit picture is 2 separate exposures. So how do we do that? We've already picked an ISO. We've already picked an aperture. Now, aperture is going to influence which shutter speed we do. Because shutter speed is going to control the ambient light. So this picture is lit. I'm at f8. I'm at 35. I'm at ISO 100. I am not changing anything except the shutter speed. Her exposure is the exact same in every one of those pictures. There's nothing changing with her. Just look at that real quick again. So 25th, I'm letting in a fair amount of ambient light. At 50th, a little bit less, 1 stop down. 100th, another stop down. Until we come to a point where I've almost eliminated all of the ambient light and all the light in the picture is only coming from the strobe. I never had to change power on my strobe during any of that. If I went to high-speed sync, then I would have to start thinking about changing the power on my strobe because I would lose a little bit of power. But that's not really a concern for me, is assuming that I have enough power. It is something that I eventually learn, right, by failing forward. But for right now, I'm just worried about that concept of I'm controlling the ambient light with shutter speed. And where that really comes into play is where I can be in the same location with the same subject and get totally different outcomes once I learn to apply all the stuff that I already know about photos. So I'm at 16 millimeters. I know that at 16 millimeters at f5, I've got 8 or 9 feet of actual depth of field, a lot of depth of field. All right. Then I say to myself, I want some ambient light in this picture, but let's just imagine that I've only got 1 light and I don't have more lights to light the background, which I didn't in this case. I had more lights, but I didn't go up and light this, mostly because I had hurt my knee and I didn't want to go up the stairs, but that's just pure laziness. A fifth of a second. Okay, now a fifth of a second is an eternity. And in hindsight, I probably should have turned up my ISO. Remember I said earlier that one of the reasons I'll turn up my ISO is so that I can get a more hand-holdable shutter speed. But I knew in my heart that the flash is going to freeze my subject, and that if I took a breath and really concentrated for a second, I could get the shot off at a fifth of a second, and it would be fine. So here we go. I let in tons of ambient light. I've lit my subject correctly. I'm good. I have him stand up. I add a second light to the back, and I change up my settings in the exact same spot. If I was to take this image into Lightroom and open up the background, you would see the stairs. The stairs are right there. He's standing right in front of them. But I went to 100. I switched out to my 70-200. I went to 124. I knew that if I would have still shot that picture at the same settings that I did for the last one, then my depth of field would have been very, very small, and the wings would have been out of focus. So I had to stop down substantially. F9 400th gives me a black frame because every lit picture is 2 separate exposures, and then I add the light. Now, how much light do I add? It's a failing forward kind of situation for me. I have failed enough where I am at a situation where I can kind of make a pretty good guess based on all the rest of the settings as to what the power should be on my strobe, on my FJ400 or my FJ800. But at the beginning, get yourself a light meter if you want to, or just commit the time to learning and moving forward with this. Now, when you're thinking about shutter speeds and you're thinking about all these settings that we're talking about, remember that I tend to think in stops. If you see me ever live, if you come to one of the classes where I go live, I will not ask you, do you think that we should go from a quarter of a second to a 25th of a second? I'll ask you, if you looked at the first picture and you said, I think it's too bright. I won't ask you how many parts of a second too bright. I'll say how many stops too bright. And for me, that was a big turning point in me really getting better at this quickly, was instead of looking at it and going, it's a quarter, it's too bright in the background, I don't like it, I think 25th would be better. I looked at it and I go, I think she's probably at least twice as bright as I want her to be. And not her, but the whole situation, the whole scenario, the whole scene. So in this case, I go to a 25th. I didn't change any aperture. I didn't change any ISO. But what I did do was take out 2.5 stops of light, 2 and 2/3 of a stop, and got a picture that more fit what I had pre-visualized earlier. That happens when it's nighttime in the studio. It happens when I'm outdoors. This process is never going to change. ISO, focal length, shutter speed, control the ambient, then add the light. If I can get that level of consistency down, it gives me a lot more time to be creative, a lot more time to start playing with different modifiers, different light placement to get the images that I see in my head. Like I said, middle of the day, later in the day, early in the morning, in the studio, if I can always have process to fall back to, I can make a picture no matter what. So 16 millimeters, I'm wide here. 800th of a second is what aperture priority told me was correct at f4. Okay, it looks okay, and I could have shot these pictures. You have a good model, you have a good location, you're going to make good pictures, right? But it wasn't what I saw. I was looking at more drama. I tend to like drama. All right, so I underexpose it a little bit. 800th to 1600th to 3200th. I said, I think it's 2 stops over. I go to 32. Okay, and then I add the light. And once I get that exposure right, now I can be creative. I can ask the model to move. I can ask the model to change positioning. I can move the lights around the model in order to just get some different types of shots. That is more important to me than everything. And whether I'm shooting on a beach with driftwood, or I'm throwing water balloons at somebody, or I'm throwing talcum powder at somebody, this process never changes. Now you're going to look at this and you're going to say, look at that shutter speed. Is that a typo? And it's not. I'm at 4.5 at 20,000th of a second at ISO 250. I'm shooting with my A9 III, which has a global shutter. Now, I really love this picture and I love these settings. But just because I'm taking advantage of my global shutter doesn't mean I couldn't have made this picture without it. I would have just had to do some math and said, all right, so if 8,000th was my fastest shutter speed in high speed sync, then I would have said, all right, so 20th, 10,000th is 1 stop, down to 8,000th is a stop and a third, and I would have had to raise my f-stop or lower my ISO by an equal amount. There's a lot of math involved in this, and if you don't like math, even basic math, then photography is going to be tough. But if you can just do that little stuff, and trust me, I can't do any I'm not good at algebra. I'm not good at anything that's extreme. As long as you fall back to your process, you can make these pictures. As long as you're stupid enough to sit in front of somebody, hitting a ball at your head and letting them bounce it off your head, you can make these pictures. Because the process will be the same for you, whether you're shooting your dog collection, your miniatures, it doesn't make a difference. If we can get to a point of consistency, that gives us control. If we have control, then we can get creative. Now, even though most of the pictures in this so far have been lit, we haven't talked about light. What we've talked about is all the things that you already do with your camera every single day. You pick it up, you pick an ISO, you pick an aperture, you pick a shutter speed, you take pictures. And you take pictures of the way that you want your scene to look. So if you're there, now it comes down to, let's add the light. Now, adding the light, that sounds really trite. I spent so much time. I painstakingly dialed in a perfect aperture. I got that dreamy depth of field. I nailed the shutter speed. I'm like some kind of camera whisperer. Then I go, I didn't turn on the light yet. Duh. And it happens to me still today. Like I was like, oh, I'm so locked up in what I'm doing, because even now I'm still kind of going through this process until I turn it on. Now, once I get that triangle, that exposure triangle locked in, if I want drama, I know that I'm going to underexpose a little bit. If I'm underexposed a little bit and I don't light my subject, because every lit picture is 2 separate exposures, I'm going to end up with a silhouette or very underexposed. So I got to say, all right, so now what am I doing? Now, when I decide to add light, I got to work through more questions. And it's almost always kind of like I'm playing with Mad Libs, right? Where I'm going, all right, what should be the next thing that I film? Maybe it's more of a choose your own adventure. There are defined branches that we can follow, and then we get to make a different choice at each one to get a different outcome. Do I want edge? Do I want it airy? Do I want it to look natural, or do I want it to look lit? Do I want it to be punchy? Do I want, one light because that's all I've got, or do I have more lights and they're going to help me tell a better story? For me, I'm thinking about what I'm going to light, what's going to be in focus, and then I'm going to think about what I'm not going to light, because the things that I don't light are going to help tell a story as well. Now, if we're trying for drama, that thing that really starts to get us there is shutter. aperture choice is going to be about our depth of field. Shutter is going to really dictate whether or not these pictures look dramatic. If I want to be dramatic, then the first step in that process is to underexpose our background. Underexpose is the start of dramatic. Now, one step after that is going to be where we're putting the light. Where's the light coming from, and what story is that going to tell? Because if underexposure is the start of being dramatic, then directionality is the finish. And directionality is going to be like the emotional steering wheel, so to speak. It's going to be, do we point the light from the front and make the person look really approachable, like, some kind of friendly talk show host, or do we move the light just slightly to the side and give them a little bit of, mystery? Do we, now they're no longer are they somebody that we are just saying we know their story. Now we're thinking about what's their story. Are they a hero? Are they a villain? Are they dangerous? Are they there to help us? Can they lead us on adventures that, that we never thought of before? Now, from there, we're going, where are we going to light? Where's the direction? Direction is like a drama dial. The more I move the lights to either side, the more drama I'm going to get. I took these pictures last night just for this, the front one. I should have got her to smile. Probably would have really tugged at you and proved my point a little bit more. But I said, please make the same look for all the pictures. First one, I'm pretty much straight ahead. The second one, I'm about 45 degrees. The third one, I'm about 90 degrees. We're adding more and more drama to the picture. Now, in the middle of those, this is just 3 shots. There's obviously a ton of degrees upon this circle. I think of my lights, once I've got a correct exposure and I've dialed in all my settings, I'm thinking about my light as though it's on a watch, where my subject is at the center of the watch and my light is one of the hands of the watch. If I've got the exposure correct from the front, my exposure will still be correct if I put it 90 degrees to the right, as long as I keep it at the same distance. Now, I've got direction. I've got it underexposed, but now I got to say to myself, just how underexposed do I want it? By adjusting that ratio of artificial and ambient light, it's going to really dial in this drama. Do I want it to be really punchy, really like I showed up with my own sun and this is really obviously lit, but it's lit on purpose. I chose to go there. There's other days where what I'm really going for is not necessarily light and airy. It's not really my style, but I do sometimes want it to be, I just found a great pocket of light. Subtle change between my background and my subject, no big difference, but they're still lit. If I showed you this picture without the lights, it should be underexposed just by a little bit, because exposing this better is what got all that good color into the background. Taking that a little step further, this is lit. 2.5, 1/160th. I've got a couple of soft boxes going. I like the way it looked, but it is a little flat. It didn't suit me. Also, the background wasn't very intriguing the way that it was. It is the Brooklyn, waterfront, and in the background, if that was the Brooklyn Bridge, let's say, and that was important to me because it's a landmark, and everybody's going to look at it and go, that's Brooklyn Bridge. Or if we saw the World Trade Center in the back, or we saw the Statue of Liberty in the back, or we saw something that screamed New York, then all right, I play with it a little more. But then I was like, no, this is really a picture about 2 good-looking people with cool makeup, cool hair, good outfits, cool colors. So how can I make it better? So the same way that you're going to make your sunsets better, the same way that you're going to, make the colors and, your outfit pop if you're shooting it, is I'm going to underexpose it a little bit. These pictures are minutes apart. 6:29 p.m. for this one, 6:33 for this one. The only thing that I changed, if you take a look, 2.5, 2.5. 1/160th, 1/1000th. I decided to get rid of the background and make it less a part of the picture and make sure that everybody knows exactly what I want them to look at. Is it perfect? It's not perfect. Light's changing fast. I'm running around. I'm trying to make, and this is both the beauty and the fear of shooting outside, is that you've given up some control, because now you are introducing, evolving, changing ambient light. But it's one of the things that really why I like it. being able to look at the scene. I'm out there, we're shooting some content for the shoulder pad company for X-Tech, and it starts to rain. You can kind of actually see some of the raindrops if you look at this closely, but now you can see them a little bit better. Storms coming in, storms going out, the sun's coming down, like it's coming out from behind clouds, and I'm rapidly changing, but I'm not changing because without reason. So it's 4:05 at 500th of a second. It's pretty cool. It suits what I'm trying to do. But a couple of minutes later, the sun moved a little bit. The storm clouds moved away. And I go to 6:3 because I wanted more in focus. I got an athlete who was a little bit bigger. He was longer. He was laying out more. So I want him totally in focus. Okay. I made a decision. But because it's a little bit later, but then the colors coming in, I have to change my shutter speed because I want to control the ambient. If I had shot this picture at 500th and I shot this picture at 500th, I would have lost all that sky. Remember, depth of field first, because it's going to affect the next choice, which is your shutter speed. These are small changes. 1/125th to 500th. 1/125th to 250th is one stop. To 500th is two stops. 1/125th and 500th doesn't sound like a lot to anybody outside of the people that are watching this. Photographers, we realize it's a big difference. But that's why I don't think about it that way. I think about it in stops because I knew that opening this up was a big deal. Now, it's the same thing inside. Doesn't make a difference. I'm going to set up an exposure. I'm going to pick an aperture that makes sense to me. I'm going to pick a shutter speed that gets me the ambient light the way that I want. Then I'm going to add the light. If I've added a second light, I'm going to start from the back. I'm going to work my way forward so that I can see what the effect of that is before I add the second light. Now, just because I'm inside doesn't mean that my shutter speed doesn't have an effect. I know that some people just go, I'm locking it in at whatever I'm doing. This is a 60th of a second. A couple minutes later, I said, I got these. I'm pretty happy with the way that background looks, but let me see what it looks like at 400th. And it definitely gave me a little bit more mood. I processed these two pictures exactly the same way, but you can see that the color on the right is richer because it's underexposed. Now, if I've got all of that going on, now I can say, how do I want it to look on my subject? We can talk about hard light or soft light. We talk about direction, hardness, color. But first, I'm going to say, where do I want it to come? What do I want shadows? What do I not? But how do I want those shadows to render in my picture? So bigger modifiers are going to give me softer light. When I talk about the amount of light, it's what I was talking about before. I'm really kind of talking about my ratio between my ambient light and my subject, because if I just needed more light, I can raise my ISO. I can use a faster lens. The amount of light is really very low on my list of things to think about when I'm really being creative here. But I am thinking about the direction. I am thinking about how hard or soft the light is. Those two things are going to really, the picture of the fireman, he looks friendlier, even though it's directional light, because it's less directional than it is in the next picture of Nick. Now, Nick suffers in this picture on purpose. I was trying to make him look tough. I directed him to look tough because not only have I decided to move the light a little bit more to the side, there's really not a big difference in the direction, but I have chosen to use a much smaller modifier. A large modifier in relation to the size of the subject is going to give us softer light. When we talk about soft light, we're talking about how the gradation happens between what's lit and what's not lit. And then we've got color. Now, we're not going to talk too much about color today. I'm guaranteed that if you search flash color on the YouTube channel for B&H, you're going to find plenty of stuff. But suffice it to say, that picture is not really a sunset. There's an orange gel on the light aimed back at me to fake a sunset because color was something that was important to that picture. Let's get back to that soft light versus hard light conversation. These pictures are not lit exactly the same, but they're close enough where you wouldn't have this giant change, except that the one on the left, I'm using a much bigger modifier, much closer. Now, if I kept them at the same power, then the one on the left would be overexposed, but I changed the power, obviously. But what's important for you to see is that even though I'm directional, even though there are shadows to camera left on the subject on the subject on the left, it is a very gradual shift. Where on the right, I'm using a smaller box, farther back. And even though I'm probably overexposed him a little bit, when I look at this as an older picture, I needed a picture that showed me this hard light because I don't do it this hard as much anymore. But the part of his face that's lit to the part of his face that's not lit is very defined, and it happens very quickly. So that's the defining force behind what is hard light. Now, how do we get hard light or soft light? We use modifiers. Modifiers are going to be anything that we put in front of our light, which is even when we're using an FJ 800 or an FJ 400, which has a beautiful, big, exposed dome of light, it is still a relatively small light source in relation to the size of the subject if we're shooting a person. So it's this big. My head's this big. It's small. How do I make it into a bigger light source? Well, I can move it closer. Okay, there's only so close I can put it before it starts to interfere with my composition. It starts to, just be unwieldy to have it so close and uncomfortable for everybody. So I can make it bigger by modifying it, throwing it through an umbrella, taking it and making it bigger. There's all different sizes of umbrellas. I can put it into a softbox. A softbox is going to give me a similar quality of light to an umbrella, but with more control. There's going to be more ability to aim it in a direction and have it just hit what I want, especially when I combine it with a grid, which I have down at the bottom. The grids are those egg crate type modifiers that we put in front of a softbox that's going to maintain directionality without giving up size. Now, reflectors are all those metal, items that come with your flash that you probably think of, some of you, as just something to protect your dome of your light, but they can be very valuable modifiers because soft light isn't always the answer. Soft light is the best answer when you need soft light. Sometimes hard light's going to be the solution, or sometimes you're going to find yourself in a situation where it's really windy and your softbox is a sail and it is turning your light into something that you are constantly terrified is going to fall over and cost you money. I really love that I've got this whole entire lineup to pick from, whether it's snoots or the pocket boxes, the reflectors, the soft boxes. But not only do I have different soft boxes, but I have different shapes and different sizes within those. And I wish that I could tell you that there's just a one size fits all solution, and there's not. I really am trying to get my daughter into photography so that she never has money to waste on drinking or doing drugs, because like this is like the thing that just keeps on taking, right? Because the more you get into it, the more you're going to be like, oh, I need that. And it's not going to be a want, it's going to be a need, because if you start to get so good that you're visualizing different looks, you're going to know that the different catch lights are going to, be created by different modifiers, that different color interiors of your umbrellas or putting diffusion on the front of your umbrella is going to give you a completely different look. Deep umbrellas, shallow umbrellas, shoot-through umbrellas, reflected umbrellas, different size soft boxes with different shapes, octas. I tend to really like the octas and the beauty dishes as opposed to the rectangulars, not because I think that they're better, not because they're easier to set up. The rapid boxes are all great and they're all easy to set up. But for me, I like the catch light because I shoot outside so much. So having a rounder catch light is better. So the octa for me is better than one of the rectangles most of the time. But one step further than that is I get myself into my beauty dishes, and I'm using the beauty dishes more often than not. And I don't want to say not because they're my favorite, but for multiple reasons. One of them is that they have more rods, so they're built a little bit tougher, and I'm tough on my gear. So if you ever see how my gear is in my car, it's not a mess. It's controlled chaos is how I choose to look at it, but everything has a place. But sometimes the lights get on top of the soft boxes. Sometimes they're under, and having these stronger ones is beneficial to me. But the real benefit is those 16 rods make it rounder. So I really love that catch light. But there's days where I'm going to shoot outside, or I'm going to shoot a ring and I need that snoot that's in the top left, or I need to throw a grid into one of these, or sometimes I need to put a sock on it to get a totally different look. And it is much like your seasonings, all the spices in the rack in your kitchen. They all are going to bring out something a little bit different in your photography, and you don't need them, because if you find a recipe that you really like, you can cook that recipe for the rest of your life. But eventually you might say, I'm a little tired of that recipe. How do I get something different? If for me, I look at the reflector that comes with my lights and I can make cool pictures with it. But if I look at that deep focus on the bottom, that's the heavyweight champ. It's like, the champ is here. It's gonna give me light at a distance, maintaining its shape. And for, if I need to compose a picture where the lights are going to be farther away, then there's no substitute for that. I have to go with that. I can't cheat it. Yeah, these days I could go into post, I can put a softbox really close to my subject and then take it out in post. And there's definitely something to be said for that if the light quality for your story requires that. It is a lot to juggle. But if you always fall back to your process, if you always fall back to realizing that all of the lighting end of this comes after we've already created a basis of consistency, then this gets a lot easier and it becomes a lot more fun to mess around, to play, to experiment, to see what kind of different results I can get. And if you keep it simple, if you always step back, take a breath, well, I can do this, I can trust the process, then yeah, you don't have to feel like you're dealing with like the big bad every time. Some of you are Buffy fans, some of you are not, but in the creative process, anxiety is like Darth Vader. Once you start down that path, it's going to dominate the shoot. You're adjusting the light. The next you're sweating over your camera settings. You're questioning your choices. You're wondering if the subject can smell your fear. And then suddenly you're not in control. If you're not in control, you can't be creative. It's, you really, and sometimes you are going to lose control. Act as if, take a moment, breathe, look down into your camera, pretend that you're staring at a picture and never let your subject know that you don't like it. This is awesome. But I think that if I make this small change, I can do it better. Buy yourself some time. Doggy paddle while you can. Don't let yourself drown. Let's sum this up. Aperture controls your depth of field. Shutter speed controls your ambient light. Same as every picture you've ever taken. You control the light. I'm going to give you my information again. Before you guys disappear and you go decide to put in your orders for new lights today, hopefully you've been so inspired. Remember to support the companies that support you. There's a lot of choices today to buy things. There's a lot of great education out there. And when a company supports you and gives you free content and gives you free education, make sure you support them. It's definitely the right thing to do. Customer service, it really does seem like some sort of a trite, like old man thing maybe, but when your lights are broken or you shattered it, the answer shouldn't ever be go buy another one. You should be able to call somebody and talk to somebody and be like, how do I make this happen? I appreciate you guys for coming out. I'm super easy to get in touch with. There is my email. Send me a message. I will get back to you. I appreciate you guys, and I'm going to stop and I'm going to see if any of you had any questions or if I've stunned you into silence or perhaps this whole thing was in silence and everybody doesn't know and nobody called me. All right. Thanks.
We weren't able to hear any of that. Can you do it
Oh,
over?
God. Let's start again.
Start over.
Right, we'll do it. Because that was the first time I went through that class. So this time I'll be better.
That was great. It was comprehensive. A little bit of everything.
There was a lot
in all areas.
Yeah. It's always hard because without the that fire to a fish moment where you get to turn to them and go, all right, what aperture do you want? What shutter speed do you want? Now let's add the light where they get to have it all click. It's harder, but people of a certain age are going to remember the commercials where I'm not only am I a customer of the men's hair club for men, I'm also a client. Everything that I talk about when I do this is what I do when I go out to shoot. That's been the beauty of this whole situation is that I was using Westcott products before I worked here. So that was always great. So I get to pick the stuff and actually be passionate about it. But also, like, this is the process I follow. I'm not here trying to sell anybody anything. I would love it if they buy lights from us, but I'm here to give you information about process. And that process is going to work no matter what you use. You can choose to do this process without customer service, or you can choose to do it with customer service. That's up to you.
You make the call. What's your go-to, man? Like, if you had one setup that you bring everywhere, no matter the size of the job, what's kind of like your standard kit?
For the longest time. All right. So, that's a great question. For the longest time, it was an FJ400 with an Octane. for two reasons. Because the FJ400 was the biggest light we had. And it's not because that makes it the best light. It's because I can do everything with a FJ400 that I can do with an FJ200, but I can't do everything with an FJ200 that I can do with an FJ400, which now I'm spoiled. I'll be the first to say I'm spoiled. Now I got an FJ800 to play with, right? And so I end up carrying that because it's not that much bigger. I'm also Yeti sized, as you know. Everybody that's there doesn't necessarily know me in person, but I'm a big boy. But it's not because I need more light per se. It's because it gives me more choices. I'm finding myself more than I had people that hit me up, friends of mine, they've known me for years and go, your work is getting better. On the one hand, I want to be like, oh, thank you so much. I want to float an ego, but I don't think it's that as much as that it's a little more diverse now. When I was shooting, everything was speed lights, before I came to Westcott, when I was shooting, everything was speed lights because I worked at a company that made speed lights. The work was fine and it was good, but everything was at 2.5, at 1.8, at 1.4. Not because that was my style, although sometimes necessity is the mother of not only invention but also of outcomes. If I end up on a desert island, even though I don't eat fish, trust me, I'll eat fish.
Gotta eat it.
I'm gonna make what I can. But everything was shallow depth of field because that was what I had. Now, if I show up, I just came back from WPPI. We shot in the desert a lot. There's plenty of pictures that show up on my Instagram where I've got starbursts behind my subject because I had the creative ingredients to stop down if I wanted to. But then there are similar pictures in the same spot where I decided I'm going to shoot at 2.8 8,000th of a second because I'm making all the choices. And for me, that's always it. Choice is is the key to me because it lets me be more creative. Now, fast forward a little bit, it's now the Manny Ortiz instead of the Octa M. They're both 36 inches. I prefer the rounder catch light. There's no other real reason than that.
Okay.
That 16 panels versus 8 is nice as far as construction goes, but it's really just about the catch light. Because when I'm zooming in on pictures, I'm going, how they like that? And if I'm zooming in on it, I assume that other people are, maybe they're not, but that I'm reverse engineering what they do. If I look in and I see a bunch of rods, I know it was an umbrella. It's not a strike against it. It's I know what it was. And I don't like the way that looks necessarily. So I'm less likely to throw umbrellas if the catch light's prominent in my picture.
Good to know. We're going to have to get you out to do an in-person. Those are always fun.
I think for your people at home that I will be doing some sort of live presentations during build. I don't know exactly what I'm doing, but there's this event coming up for you guys. I'm going to throw in a little check, but in June at the Javits Center, right? And we're going to have a few Westcott speakers there with me, but I'll definitely have a space there, and people are definitely invited to come try all this out. But yes, I hear that the event space might be maybe am I letting the cat out of a bag here, or I don't know.
I know nothing.
Maybe we can get some more in-person stuff going on soon.
There we go. Maybe.
There's a rumor on the street. The word on the street, Huggy Bear, is that there might be some other openings for in-person events in the near future. It doesn't help our friends in California and in Bali, but it's for locals. Yeah, that I'm always available, man. You guys are a hop, skip, and a tunnel away from me.
I love it. A hop, skip, a tunnel, and a congestion.
Well, luckily, yeah, that is what it is.
It's only $9. Let's go.
Yeah, only $9. Yeah.
JC, always good having you, man.
No questions from anybody? No questions?
Look, questions.
People hate.
No, I feel like when you're concise and you make everything easy to understand, you don't leave any room open for questions, or everyone's sitting there still processing.
Well, I gave my information. I assume will end up online at some point, so they can always come back. Thank you guys. I appreciate it as always for you guys hosting me, and for everybody who decided to take a little bit of time out to come and listen to what I had to say. Hopefully I'll see you in person somewhere.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So on that note, we'll close it out for the day. Huge thank you to JC and Westcott, and to all of our viewers out there. Another edition of the B&H Event Space in the books. Catch y'all next time.
Bye-bye.